From WJ Live, powered by the Western Journal. I'm Josh Manning, Deputy Managing Editor for Assignment at the Western Journal. Joining me on the show today, on my left, we have Caleb Gina. He is almost brand new. He's hit his 1 month anniversary, I think. New assignment editor over at the Western Journal. And over on my right, you know him, you love him, the original inventor of the unisex leotard, Cameron Arcand. Cameron is a contributing writer to the Western Journal and is also interning for us over part. I don't know, how long are you interning for us?
We'll see.
For a long while. Not as long as he was before I introduced him that way. Anyway, thank you for joining us on this Friday afternoon. We're so thrilled you're wrapping your week up with WJ Live. And as is usual, we've got three pieces that we want to bring you today. One of these particularly has to do with 9/11. The anniversary is tomorrow. And it has been on many people's minds. We've been talking about it around the newsroom all week, but a whole lot today. And Caleb's actually going to be bringing us a story, really a story of heroism on 9/11 that not very many people know. It has to do with the fighter pilots who launched that day and the circumstances under which they launched and what they were prepared to do that a lot of people don't know about. That's going to be coming from Caleb. Cameron's got some really kind of dire information about plans Biden's IRS has for our banks, and this will almost certainly affect the vast majority of you who are watching. The IRS has found a new way to surveil us, and you need to know about it. That's coming up as well. But first off, we are in the throes of panic about COVID. COVID has been around for over a year now. Before long, we're going to be looking at the 2-year anniversary. Joe Biden came out yesterday and announced a sweeping set of government interventions designed to promote and really, I think, force people to get vaccinated. Now, we at the Western Journal are pro-vaccine. We would tell you your chances of surviving COVID with the vaccine are a heck of a lot better than without the vaccine, but that is a personal choice. I myself have not been vaccinated, but again, that is a personal choice, and we would encourage people to make the decision that you feel is right for you. But Biden did nothing but amp up the panic surrounding COVID yesterday with his announcements. We are also coming into, as I mentioned a moment ago, the 20th anniversary of 9/11. That will bring the idea of terror back up and fear of the unknown, fear of what could happen. And that really is ultimately what's behind COVID and terrorism. It is fear of the unknown. We simply don't know what will happen tomorrow. And we are trying desperately as humans to figure out what to do about that. But there's a piece going around on social media from C.S. Lewis, famed Christian apologist and literature professor, who dealt with this same question some years ago. Only the context then wasn't terrorism and it wasn't COVID. It was the bomb. And a lot of people were trying to figure out, in the advent of nuclear weapons, how are we supposed to live knowing that our cities could be vaporized in an instant? C.S. Lewis wrote a response to that, and if you'll indulge me, I want to read it. We're going to have it on screen as well, but I think it is worth us thinking about as we try to figure out how do we live with the fear of COVID, and really how do we live in a post-9/11 world where terrorism abounds as well. C.S. Lewis wrote this: "How will the bomb find you?" In one way, we think a great deal too much of the atomic bomb. How are we to live in an atomic age? I'm tempted to reply, why, as you would have lived in the 16th century when the plague visited London almost every year, or as you would have lived in a Viking age when raiders from Scandinavia might land and cut your throat at night, or indeed, as you are already living in an age of cancer, an age of syphilis, an age of paralysis, an age of air raids, an age of railway accidents, an age of motor accidents. In other words, don't let us begin by exaggerating the novelty of our situation. Believe me, dear sir or madam, you and all who you love were already sentenced to death before the atomic bomb was invented, or we might say before COVID came on the scene. It is perfectly ridiculous to go about whimpering and drawing long faces because the scientists have added one more chance of painful and premature death to a world which already bristled with such chances, and in which death itself was not a chance at all, but a certainty. If we're all going to be destroyed by an atomic bomb, let that bomb, when it comes, find us doing sensible and human things, praying, working, teaching, reading, listening to music, bathing the children, playing tennis, chatting to our friends over a pint and a game of darts, not huddled together like frightened sheep and thinking about bombs, or maybe thinking about masks or germs. They may break our bodies, a microbe can do that, but they need not dominate our minds. What the atomic bomb has really done is to remind us forcibly of the sort of world we're living in which during the prosperous period before, we were beginning to forget. And this reminder is, so far as it goes, a good thing. We've been waked from a pretty dream, and now we can begin to talk about realities. It's our business to live by our own law and not by fears, to follow in private or in public life the law of love and temperance, even when they seem to be suicidal, and not the law of competition and grab, even when they seem to be necessary to our own survival. For it is part of our spiritual law never to put survival first, not even the survival of our species. We must resolutely train ourselves to feel that the survival of man on this earth, much more of our own nation or culture or class, is not worth having unless it can be had by honorable and merciful means. Coming to the end here. Nothing is more likely to destroy a species or a nation than a determination to survive at all costs. Those who care for something else more than civilization are the only people by whom civilization is at all likely to be preserved. Those who want heaven most have served earth best. Those who love man less than God do most for man. Those are strong words. Like I said, they've been floating around on social media for a while now, and they've really applied to COVID, but they apply to a post 9/11 world as well. And so, fellas, I'd like to ask you, is Lewis right here? Is the world in which we survive at any and all costs, is that actually a world you would want to live in, Cameron?
Well, I think this is a very powerful passage because it does very much apply to today, where we're dealing with this constant, never-ending fear. And just to apply that directly to the coronavirus, it's going to take a long time for us to get out of this. I know people think that if we kind of maybe do this one thing, that it's all going to get better overnight. But it's feeding this constant cycle of fear that we're going to have more variants, more different restrictions, and we're in for the long haul. And I think C.S. Lewis kind of points this out in terms of the Cold War, the atomic bomb, these different incidents going on militaristically that we were dealing with throughout the 20th century, that in this century we're going to be dealing with this major public health threat. And we can't lock down our lives in our own personal way forever. And I feel like that's really going to be something that people are slowly starting to realize. I think it kind of breaks my heart to know that there are probably people who are my age, maybe some millennials, that have barely left their house since March 2020 and have really let this whole process get in the way of living their life. And I think C.S. Lewis makes an important point that could really be applied to not only the bomb, not only the coronavirus, but to even just struggles that we're dealing with in our own daily lives that we feel should just get us to curl up in a hole and never come out of it.
Lewis said, Caleb, that we've been waked from a pretty dream, and now we can begin to talk about realities. We were living in a prosperous period, and we've really forgotten what reality is like out there. Is the fear and trepidation surrounding COVID, is part of that a function of us having lived in a world that was so controlled and so luxurious, and now there's this new thing that we can't control?
Yeah, absolutely. Just before I respond to your question, just wanted to take a moment to say I've only been at the Western Journal about a month. It's been a tremendous blessing to me. I was a big fan of WJ Live before I started working here. So it's very surreal to actually be on the show. I just appreciate the opportunity.
We're glad you're here.
In regards to your question, I think when you think back to right before the pandemic began, Trump had the economy in an excellent position. You had multiple international situations like the North Korea situation more or less addressed. You had a coherent strategy in Afghanistan that was verbalized. So there was this feeling of stability in the country that I think a lot of people bought into and felt very comfortable with. But the idea that something is going to dramatically change and change quickly, when you look back through the lineage of historical events, that's how it always goes. I think fear wears a different outfit a lot of the time, but it's still the same thing in its essence that it's always been. So whether it was World War I, or the Spanish flu, or World War II, or Korea, or Vietnam, or any of the litany of society-altering events that have happened in the last century, each generation has had to carry the burden in its own time. So I think part of the mistake and why people have had a hard time dealing with all of the dysfunction and the instability in the world is they don't want to shoulder that burden for themselves. I think everybody's had to carry that weight, and it's incumbent on us to do it at this time. And a lot of people, because they've been told that your personal responsibility doesn't matter and you're a victim and everything is outside of your control, they don't want to do everything they can in their own life to marshal the resources to edify themselves, those around them. And so it's, in many ways, a lot of people, and I think much of our society has been a house of cards through this time. And instead of having this catastrophe like 9/11 strengthen the country, in a lot of ways it feels like we've pulled apart more as a result of what's happened.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. And it has truly elevated a climate of fear that is now manifesting all over the place. And one place you see it, you and I were talking about polling on this earlier today, is just complete mistrust of the government.
Yeah.
And that comes pretty easily when you have the government doing the sorts of things that we see it doing right now. And Cameron, we're looking right now at a new initiative that's going to insert the government into banks in a new way, but that will almost certainly lead to surveillance of pretty much everybody who's watching, I think.
Yeah, and this is a pretty practical thing. I know we kind of talk a lot about culture and different things on this show. This is a very practical issue that people should be aware of. There is a proposal in Biden's budget right now. So it's just a proposal. This isn't something that is guaranteed to happen. But right now, the IRS, and part of this proposal is to allow them to essentially look into your bank account if you have more than $600 of inflows and outflows a year. That's the way the American Banker publication phrases this. Now, the reason why they would do this, so your bank would essentially have to report these transactions to the IRS, is to catch on to tax cheats. Now, what they want to do is they're trying to close this kind of so-called tax gap where people are underreporting their income. And this is mainly an issue with probably the 1%, a lot of America's wealthy who, or if you're someone who has a lot of different forms of income and maybe you're intentionally or unintentionally underreporting how much you make annually in your taxes. But here's kind of where the issue comes in. There's two big issues with this. The first is that the financial sector is not happy about this proposal at all. And in a letter to the Senate Subcommittee on Finance wrote saying that while they agree that the IRS should exist pretty much, they're also saying that they're
questionable, but okay.
They should exist, but they are saying that, hey, this is overkill for us in the financial sector. It is impossible to ask us to report anything, any transaction over $600 or a bank account. It's just not realistic because there's so many people where that would really impact the average American. And that's kind of where the line is being drawn right now. And there's some serious questions about this, because at what point does this become about a very wealthy person intentionally hiding how much money they're making? And when does it start to become, oh, you bought an appliance recently, that puts you on the radar of the IRS, and now all of a sudden, because you had unreported income unintentionally from maybe last year or the year before, the IRS now might be able to come after you for that. That's where the line is drawn right now. And I kind of want to ask you guys, is this something that Americans should just be brushing off right now, or is this something that they need to be aware of?
Yeah, well, the pace of big government expansion is dizzying. It feels like every day you fire up the computer, turn on the TV, get the newspaper open, and there's some big nanny state program that's expanded to a level that we've never seen before in American history. So I think part of the reason there's such a distrust in institutions in this country is because our institutions don't trust us. Our institutions don't look at us as individuals and say, you know what? I think for the most part, on balance, the American people don't need somebody peering into their bank account, sifting through all their statements, and then trying to find some smoking gun where we're going to pin you to the wall for some impropriety in some way. We've lost this trust factor both as a people to our government and our government to us as people, that for the most part, a lot of this stuff does not need to be monitored.
Yeah, that sort of goes back to, was it the Madisonian quote about our form of government being fit only for a religious people? That's exactly what happens when you've got a culture that's not behaving in a moral fashion, in a Christ-like fashion, a fashion that exemplifies integrity. Then nobody really can trust each other. There are plenty of people trying to cheat on their taxes. And there are people in the government who are using information on people who are trying to cheat on their taxes for nefarious purposes. Edward Snowden showed us this. So it really does kind of create this negative feedback loop where mistrust begets more mistrust. And Cameron, you said it was something that may affect the 1% more than others. But if I understand it correctly, if there's a $600 transaction or more, that's going to be reported.
Yeah. And that's the crazy part about this is they're saying you have people like Elizabeth Warren, people like the IRS chief saying, oh, this is really only going to come after the millionaires and the billionaires.
No,
then why is the bar set so low that even someone who maybe if you have one instance of a $600 inflow and outflow annually. So if that happens annually, that's basically all of us.
Yeah, that
would apply to you.
My wife is a nanny. That's her job.
Yeah.
And we would show up, if I understand this correctly, we would show up on the reports 52 times per year. She's paid weekly, and it would show up all the time. I mean, it's a way to monitor everyone.
And there was a mechanism in place to monitor whether or not people were cheating on their taxes or withholding government funds that were due to them. Like, that's called having to file your taxes every year.
Yeah.
So instead of it being this once a year, we're going to take a thorough look at what's going on, they're saying, well, we can't trust you. We have to check you every single time we reach this certain dollar threshold. So it's a recalibration of what the expectation is.
So is crypto playing a role in this? Is that part of what this is? They're trying to close the crypto loophole?
That wouldn't surprise me, but it seems like the people who are pushing this, like Elizabeth Warren and stuff, I think they're really coming after some of these big billionaires, like Bezos, Gates, that kind of crowd. But it kind of on that same note, though, is you're going to have a lot of people that maybe hear about this and they're like, well, I'm not doing anything wrong with my taxes. I don't know what the issue is going to be. I think they should go ahead and they should snoop into everybody's bank account if we're not doing anything wrong. That's a big problem because let's say you're one of those people. Let's say you're a freelance writer, maybe. And sometimes when you're filing your taxes as a freelancer, you might make a mistake or two. Then all of a sudden the IRS is after you for that. And that's kind of the issue with a lot of these big government policies is that it's so easy to dismiss them as, oh, if I'm not doing anything wrong, then it's not a big deal. But that justification isn't going to work when it applies to all of us and there's a crackdown on every single person.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like if you video people all the time, you're going to find people, you're going to get dirt on them. Mm-hmm. You're going to get dirt on them. But the idea was always kind of the idea of the Fourth Amendment. The government's got to have a reason to be watching you.
Yep.
It can't just throw out a dragnet and pick up people who are minding their own business and just hope that they're going to catch them in a crime. That's not how it works. This sounds like something far more out of the Soviet Union that you would hear about than it does out of the United States.
And there are constitutional concerns with the Fourth Amendment directly being raised with this. So it'll definitely be interesting to see the different developments that come out of this in the next few months and weeks with Biden's budget proposal, because this is something that has been drastically underreported in the news. When I was doing this report the other day for us, I almost thought it sounded too good to be true because I was not finding enough information.
Yeah.
And the more I was reading into it, I was like, oh, geez, this is a real problem. This is something that could affect a lot of people. And there's a lot of stuff there that people need to be aware of and should be trying to dig out for information on this policy and to see if it will be going into place.
There are so many loopholes that they could close that are so much smarter than this. I mean, I've had when I was freelancing, I had opportunities to defraud the government of tens of thousands of dollars because I could have changed the way I reported. No one would have known it except me. No one would have known it except me. And there was a loophole that allowed me to do that. They're not closing that. Instead, they're just watching everybody.
Exactly.
It is fear and it is mistrust. And speaking of fear and mistrust, we are coming to the 20th anniversary of September 11th. And Caleb, on his debut episode, has really an interesting story that a whole lot of people have not heard. It took place on September the 11th. It happened in relation to Flight 93 and fighter pilots who were sent up. And it is an absolutely incredible tale of selflessness and patriotism. So Caleb, take it away. Share that with folks who are watching.
Yeah. For my generation, 9/11 was the biggest catastrophe that we had ever lived through before the coronavirus hit. I think it's interesting that on this panel, we have like three very different perspectives where Cameron wasn't even alive when 9/11 happened. Josh obviously had a much more of a cognitive ability to sift through what was happening, and I was in the third grade at the time. So for me, this story resonates because it helps to exemplify, like Josh said, this American tendency to make the best of a horrible situation and sacrifice for the greater good. So I think we all know that United 93 was the fourth plane in the hijackings that took place on September 11th, and I think most people say it was going to the Capitol or the White House, one of the two, Capitol building. I mean, obviously it was going to D.C. So part of the timeline's interesting with United 93 because the two other planes hit the World Trade Center and the Pentagon before United 93 was hijacked. So when this takes place, United 93 is heading back to D.C. towards its target, but people are on their cell phones on that flight, and people on the ground that they were reaching out to them told them that 9/11 was happening in New York and relayed the situation. So a big part of the reason that those people felt it was necessary to take the plane back, even if it cost them their lives, is because they knew what had happened in New York, and they knew if they did not act, not only would they perish, but many more people would also be lost. But happening simultaneously with this brave actions by the passengers of United 93, there were two F-16 pilots where jets were scrambled from Andrews Air Force Base in Maryland. And this all was happening so quickly without really an awareness of the true scope of it, that these jets, when the order came that something must be done, they weren't even armed. Like, they didn't have the missiles that would have been necessary to shoot down an airliner if that was the decision that would have been authorized by the president. And they knew that when they took off. The pilots were Lieutenant General Mark Sassville and Heather Penny, who was actually one of the first women combat pilots. And they made the selfless decision to get in those airplanes, intercept Flight 93, or United 93, and without having long-range weaponry, they've even said this in the press, so this isn't like a hot take or something from my imagination. They verbalized that they would have kamikazed their aircraft into the plane to bring it down if necessary. And to think about that, where they were voluntarily taking off from Andrews Air Force Base, thinking that they were never going to come back, that they were going to sacrifice their lives in order to prevent a greater catastrophe and loss of life from occurring, that to me is just unbelievable. Because there's this very natural human instinct to protect ourselves and to make a decision that's in our own best interest. And there's nothing more selfless than saying, I'm going to lay my life down to save innocent people. And fortunately, they weren't put in a position to have to make that decision because of the insanely brave acts of Todd Beamer and the other folks that were on that flight that took control of the plane and put it in a field in Pennsylvania. And to me, the question that I pose to you guys, looking back on all of this, is I think there's a tendency to focus on the catastrophe and the disaster and the loss of life because the nation was absolutely gripped with sorrow in the aftermath of what happened. But thinking about all of the brave actions of that day from United 93, from these 2 Air Force pilots, from the people that went into Ground Zero to save lives, I think this is a better encapsulation of the American character and our courage as opposed to us being overwhelmed with fear. So how do you guys see that American disposition exemplifying itself with those circumstances?
I'll add to this because it just feels, it's weird being part of a generation that I was not alive during this. I only know the world post 9/11. I only know like a world where you go to an airport, you have to go through TSA first. And I think just kind of hearing these stories, it's definitely strange because for me, it wasn't something that I was around for. So it's kind of hearing more about a historical event. But as an American, you can still kind of almost empathize with kind of hearing these different stories and learning about what happened on that day and all the stories that go into it. And it's just kind of, it's very interesting to hear the different perspectives and seeing how much America has changed and even recognizing that change as someone who hasn't really been able to process it over the years and just seeing how divided as a country we've become. We were talking about in the office earlier about how October 2001, the country was very united, and the weeks following the September 11th attacks, we haven't seen that level of patriotism in this country in a very long time, and I don't even know if I will ever see that level of patriotism in my lifetime. Just the direction this country has gone. There's a lot of animosity towards our own country. And I'm not talking about the government when I talk about that. A lot of people make the mistake of equating your love of country with the love of the state. And that's not what this is about. This is about your love and appreciation for the American spirit, for the American character, for those stories of those fighter pilots. And I feel like hearing these stories as someone who wasn't alive for it is incredibly impactful. And I'm hoping that more people in my generation will hear these things and feel more equipped to be proud to be from the United States of America and feel equipped to essentially carry on the legacy of these people who are no longer with us, who fought and died for our country, who died during 9/11, and keep improving this country the way it is and keep preserving that American spirit.
As you were talking, Caleb, I was thinking back to a couple of the passages we read from Lewis at the top of the broadcast, and he said, "It's our business to live by our own law and not by fears, to follow the law of love and temperance, even when they seem to be suicidal." It seems to me that that's what those fighter pilots were doing. They knew that they might die up there. They might sacrifice their lives. But in doing so, they were going to be showing the ultimate sacrifice and incredible love and remarkable temperance and saving other people. And there's hardly a better picture of that than what we saw on 9/11. We saw it with firefighters going in, knowing they might not come back out. We saw it with police officers, same thing, going in, knowing they might not come back out. We saw it with people who signed up for the military immediately.
Yep.
The military recruitment just surged from people being willing to sacrifice themselves to protect their country and their loved ones. And so in some way, that brought out the best in so many of us for some amount of time. Sadly, it also provided, sin gets there and corrupts everything. And so it also brought about hatred for people who are different from us, some of it unearned hatred. That also provided the opportunity for the left to begin playing identity politics like crazy. And a whole lot of the anti-American sentiment we see now came from those days, springs from those days when we were very suspicious of people from the Middle East, because we knew that radical Islam dominates parts of the Middle East, and we knew radical Islam had brought the towers down. So it is a very hard thing, the situation that it put us in. But truly, the story you're telling there, and so many of the stories that are told about 9/11, really are people living this out. They're people letting go of their own lives, becoming, to the extent that they might even be suicidal, so that they could save other lives and show love and grace and mercy. And that is a truly amazing thing. Truly amazing thing. Do you have anything else on the...
Yeah, I just think there's a very human tendency when something absolutely tragic happens is for us to move on quickly. I think it's extremely hard for us to, especially in this country, ponder extremely challenging chapters and dark periods, because it's not fun to look those horrifying memories in the face. But I think if we're unwilling to go back and look at the entirety of a situation, and we just focus on the catastrophic elements or the sadness or the grief, and all of that absolutely deserves an emotional investment. But if we don't look back and we don't take a complete view of things, we miss an astounding amount of heroism and the very best of our people in the human race exemplifying itself under the worst of circumstances. So for me, as we're just spending the next couple of days like pondering these people and everything that's happened, and you know, Netflix put out like a documentary on 9/11. It's been in the top 10 all this week. So you can tell people have this on the brain. I think it's just incumbent upon us to challenge our American citizens to think about the heroism, the unbelieving overcoming of obstacles that took place, and just avoid this tendency to either bury it or just fixate on the things that were absolutely traumatic. And there has been a lot of negative consequences based upon what's happened, but those people that sacrificed their lives on United 93, or these pilots, or the first responders, they absolutely deserve our undying gratitude and attention and affection, and we can never let their stories disappear into the echoes of history.
As we said so many times after 9/11, we will never forget, and that is important and vital if we're to continue to live freely. All right, that's it for us on this Friday. We've wrapped up another week here on WJ Live. We are here every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific. Thank you for joining us. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to click the subscribe button. After you click that, you're going to be able to click a little bell that pops up off to the side. That means once you do that, that means you're going to be notified every time the show goes live. So essentially, that should keep YouTube from shadow banning us as far as you're concerned. You'll still get content when we put it out, and that is always a threat. Additionally, if you would like to support the Western Journal in a more direct way, we would be thrilled. You can go to westernjournal.com/join. That's westernjournal.com/join. There's several options there for ways you can directly support the journalism that we do at the Western Journal. We are the biggest and most popular, most influential Christian conservative news and commentary site in the world. We are thrilled we get to bring those stories to you. It is not a cheap thing, and we don't have any billionaires behind us. We're a small company based in Phoenix, and we're actually family owned, so any support you can give us, we are so grateful for. And we will partner with you, and we will do our best to never let you down and to always stand for the truth. That is it for us today. For Caleb, for Cameron, for Raps and Rachel and Kayla and everybody in the booth, we want to wish you a good day and a good weekend. I'm going to leave you with a passage from C.S. Lewis while you're thinking about COVID, while you're thinking about 9/11. When it comes to find us, when the bomb comes, let it find us doing sensible and human things, praying, working, teaching, reading, listening to music, bathing the children, playing tennis, chatting to our friends over a pint and a game of darts, not huddled together like frightened sheep. That's a pretty good way to live. Let's live that way going forward. We wish you a good weekend, and we will see you again on Monday on WJ Live.